Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our first interactive session for tonight's God Summit. Please give it up again for Dr. Damaris. We would like to have a brief interview with her on her expertise on evolution and biology and how, as a Christian, we can appreciate the science world. So, Dr. Damaris, kindly give us a brief history of your educational background and also what has been the most challenging of your disciplines and the most fulfilling, if you don't mind.
Thank you for having me again. So I will start with the most fulfilling part in my educational journey has been in the science field. And also the most challenging part has also been in the science field. So in terms of my educational background, I started with science because my siblings, my 4 brothers who are all in the sciences as well, were doing science. I went to medical school and then branched to do my master's in biology, doctorate in neurobiology of behavior, and I'm now in the science education. I became interested in evolution. I'm not an evolutionary biologist. I became interested in evolution doing work with my students on evolution till date when I saw there was a lot of cognitive dissonance with the understanding of evolution, which really means misunderstanding.
Thank you. One of the things I have come to experience from listening and watching other Christian scientists is that there is this notion that you have to dismiss your Christian faith or every notion of God in order to be a good scientist. Has that been your experience, and how have you dealt with it?
Yes, it has been. I have very close family members that are not persons of faith, and so they often wonder my interest in things of faith and the fact that I'm a scientist as well. It doesn't seem to reconcile. Many times my students will realize that I'm a person of faith because I don't hide it, and they would always wonder how I am reconciling both, because a lot of people think it's mutually exclusive, which means that you cannot be both.
And have you found any evidence along your journey that has strengthened you in your Christian convictions within your discipline?
Absolutely. A lot of what I find myself part of, which includes the science, really points to God for me. Although I'm not a physicist, 2 things have really grounded my faith through the science, which is singularity and the Big Bang Theory. It may sound ironic because of those terms, but yes, it has really grounded my faith in God.
Can you elaborate further? What about the Big Bang Theory? What about singularity that gives you a firm assurance of the Christian faith?
So I will start with the singularity. Singularity is a concept that the natural laws of physics cannot explain. Physicists say that the singularity marks the point where everything that we know about physics governing our universe, our galaxies, the Earth, everything breaks down. Timelessness and all of this exists in that singularity. And the Big Bang Theory is not an explosion in space. It actually occurs from that singularity that nothing can explain to the formation of space and time where everything in our physical understanding sits. So, of course, those two grinds my faith.
Okay, so when we look at the Big Bang, are we looking at the very fact that it tells us and affirms the theistic position that there was a beginning and that the universe is not eternal? Is that?
Absolutely. The misconception about the term eternal universe is because the universe is expanding within an existence that cannot be explained by science. So that expansion is what they are using the term eternal that can be misleading. So does that answer your question?
It does. Is it right for me then to think regarding singularity that if scientists are telling us that we cannot use anything but science to determine knowledge, their point of origin, which is singularity, all physics breaks down, in itself is not scientific? Is that a right extrapolation?
That's a good analysis, absolutely so. But I don't think we have to be careful saying scientists are saying, because it doesn't make it the dogma of whatever statement is coming from a scientist. It doesn't matter how famous they are, because they are saying it from their perspective. And we can all be engaging in the same fundamental topic and add to it. And so sometimes no natural scientist, and I know I'm saying this publicly, no natural scientist is going to tell you that our whole existence is just the physical dimension alone. Some may use that alone as what they want to believe, but there's more to life than just that part from an atheistic scientist.
Thank you. So we want to switch up from cosmology to biology.
Yes.
Can you help us appreciate what the Darwinian theory of evolution is in terms of the book that he wrote, The Origin of Species? Can you just help us break it down and help us understand what evolution is?
To start off, The Origin of Species, that title and the content of the book are two separate things. The content of the book, which is some aspect of it, natural selection, which I will speak to if that comes to play, is not about the origin of species. So that title, again, is misleading. Again, back to why I like to talk about cognitive dissonance, right? You say a term, and it's something else. But do you know the title of the full title? That's your quiz. The full title of Darwin. Is it just The Origin of Species, or there's more?
I think there is more. The title is The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle of Life. Favored races.
I'm glad you emphasized that, because you could see that in my eyes. So do you see there are three parts to this long title? There's origin of species, there's natural selection, and there's what? Favored races, which was used to bring about theories like social Darwinism, which basically an English philosopher by Herbert Spencer coined the word the survival of the fittest to emphasize on that kind of choosing the best, right? And has had its ramification, racism, slavery, and all those social science piece, pooling a natural science and forging it pseudo-scientifically. And all social scientists have rejected the social Darwinism, but most people don't know that. In terms of the natural selection piece, is a different aspect of an evolutionary process, one of them, which was also discovered by a Christian scientist, Alfred Wallace. Have you heard of Alfred Wallace before?
No, I haven't.
No.
Please.
I wish he was more popular, though.
So, is there any difference between Alfred Wallace's theory of evolution and Darwinian theory of evolution?
I would be explicit. The evolution by natural selection, which is one of the evolutionary process among many others like mutation, gene flow, genetic drift, non-random mating, and natural selection. That one evolutionary process of natural selection is exactly the same as what was discovered by Alfred Wallace. As the Darwin understanding of the natural selection piece, that one part, is exactly the same as what Alfred Wallace discovered.
So Alfred Wallace, a Christian, and Darwinian theory of evolution are basically the same with respect to natural selection.
With respect to natural selection. And they discovered it independently. So it wasn't like a collaborative work. Yeah.
Okay, so how did we get to what we understand in our layman's language as macroevolution and microevolution, where in microevolution we are looking at changes within a same species, and macroevolution has to do with a change into a different form of species? How did all these things come into play?
So, again, dissonance. I'm sure a lot of people will go away with the word dissonance. Misleading. And as much as I'll be using the term micro and macro evolution, I shy away from it a lot because the understanding of macro evolution that you just said to me, that species is changing into another species, is not biologically accepted and sound biologically understanding. We are not saying chimpanzees and monkeys are changing to form humans. You should have seen them changing by now. Why have they stopped? So it's, again, an understanding that has been lost. But I know why it exists, because as people say, there's no smoke without fire, right? There were two biologists that brought what evolutionary process when they were observing the physical world. And one of them, Jean-Baptiste Lamarck and Charles Darwin. Lamarck's idea of evolution is what I think people still are holding. And let me explain to you what the Lamarckian evolution is. The Lamarckian evolution is saying that when the environment changes on you, you acquire traits based on the environmental changes. Like a zebra's head is stretching longer only because it's trying to find food and it had to stretch it. So the environment caused it to change. And it will pass that change to its offspring. That is false. Biologists, and I'm not saying this as, oh, Christian, biologists reject Lamarckian understanding of evolution. With that said, there are evolutionary processes that impacts a population of the same species that brings about variations, which we are calling microevolution. Macroevolution is some kind of speciation that has been misconstrued as meaning that a species is changing into another species. No biologist is saying that. Not just Christian biologists. No biologist who knows their biology is saying that.
Interesting. You know, there's this famous picture, The Progress of March, where you have an ape, and then the next picture is an ape but standing a little bit taller, and then it progresses into a human. That has been the most famous of pictures depicting evolution, and seems as if that is well accepted. Can you speak to that?
Do we happen to have the image? If not, that's totally okay. All right. So I would point to two universities that are very famous in the US. Washington University in St. Louis. They have debunked that mindset. It's wrong, okay? But I need to qualify this. When you look at the original image, it's about 15 of them, 15 of these species that look like slowly to that upright organism. And it was when the manuscript was folded, the way it was folded just showed the 6 of them. So it became the popular image, right? The original person in 1865, I believe, who brought that illustration, it's an illustration that has gone bad, was explaining more of a time stamp. There was no connectivity to this changes to this and it changes. It was more of a time stamp, more like a ladder, right? So this is a species with its own population. This is a species with its own population. And humans, Homo sapiens to be precise, were the last to be formed at the end. And so that's what that March of Progress is about. They call it March of Progress, but it's not a March of Progress.
Thank you. One of the things I want to find out is this. As a Christian biologist, is there anything within the study of biology that grounds us in the sense that you look at the human design and can categorically say, this is not an accident, this is from a designer? Is there any evidence you can equip us with?
Absolutely. So this brings me to the concept of speciation. Again, this is a scientific term. The formation of species is speciation, where an organism is formed and made in what it's supposed to be, and then as it reproduces, kind begat kind, right? Now, there are two things I need to delineate. First is understanding evolutionary process that brings about diversity of within the same species, okay, which you call microevolution. And then there is the speciation piece that is explaining the same way you are going to explain how a child is formed biologically, right? That is an egg and a sperm, it forms a zygote, morula, on and on and on. There is a process that can be explained in how we have all the different species that exist today and even those that are extant. And that explanation is what, when you don't explain it properly, it brings about the confusion that you explain about macroevolution, as if species are changing to form other species. So that I want to say up front. And then your question, to go back to it and answer it, the formation of speciation stays within the blueprint of its DNA molecular fabric that serves as the blueprint to build your physical structure. So this building has a blueprint, and when you follow it, it will look like this. Another house will have a different blueprint. So every species has its own blueprint and is part of a genetic pool of population that makes them who they are. Yes. Does that answer your question?
I hope you could go a bit further in how this points to a designer, that this is not just a random accident that brought us about, but this is something which is guided, because evolution has to do with an unguided process. But we are looking at something that is guided. Is there anything within your study that gives you a bit of comfort or firm conviction that this is a guided process and this cannot be an accident?
There is randomness, quantum randomness, and there's deterministic things. Look at yourself right now and tell me whether your toes and your feet are randomly formed. So how do you walk? You pull one foot and here. It's all design. If it wasn't designed, you would be all over the place. Have you heard of teratoma before? I'm sure there are medical doctors here. If you see a teratoma, a teeth is here, a hair is here, this is here, everything is random. So I don't even know why people talk about random. There is no randomness to any living existence. There isn't.
I guess, David, we can join in David in saying that we are fearfully and wonderfully made in that sense.
Amen to that.
Okay. You made mention of some words. I'm hoping that you can explain a bit further and briefly the processes of evolution. You talked about natural selection, you talked about the gene pool, you talked about mutation. Can you just briefly explain it to us so that we don't walk away a bit confused?
Sure. So I will start with evolution because it seems you are asking me questions on that. So individuals do not evolve. Individuals do not evolve. You don't evolve. I don't evolve. Individuals do not evolve. Populations evolve. What is causing a population to evolve are different evolutionary processes that is impacting that population to bring the variation that we see. So, what are these evolutionary processes? Let's start with natural selection because you mentioned that. Natural selection is when, let's say, there is malaria because of mosquitoes, and individuals that their genes, they have the sickle cell gene allows them to survive because of the malaria. It's not about the fittest, right? It's not about the fittest. It's about the fact that we have mosquitoes causing malaria. But if you have sickle cell, you are the mosquitoes, they don't like the sickle blood shape, so they can't survive in it. So somebody with a sickle cell is more likely to survive in that environment that is full of the Plasmodium parasite causing the malaria, versus those that don't have the sickle cell that will get the malaria and die off if there's no treatment for the malaria. So natural selection has occurred because the people that did not have the sickle cell did not survive. And now those that have it have survived in that population. So it's a population mind when we are talking about evolution. Evolution is population, not individual. But antibiotics, they tell us not to abuse antibiotics because the bacteria become resistant. Do you think the bacteria are changing? Well, mutation is one kind, so that's a different story. But if you're talking about natural selection, it's because all the bacteria that were faced with the environment of the antibiotics have all died. And those that the antibiotics could not kill are now alive. So now they become the population. Does that make sense? Yes. So that's natural selection. Gene flow is emigration and immigration. If you are bringing, let's say it's all of us just here, and I'll use us as an example, and all of a sudden white people are coming in and intermarrying, we will look different because now there's immigration. Or if people are leaving, those that are left will be different based on, so that's gene flow. So natural selection, gene flow. Genetic drift is when it's like a bottleneck effect, when some few people start their own kind of population. So that is, and they can still, do you realize there's still interbreeding that can occur within that population as evolution occurs? It's not changing to another species. So I've mentioned natural selection, gene flow, genetic drift. Mutation. People with sickle cell, I just talked about sickle cell or Down syndrome, are they not part of the human population? They are. So far as you are still the gene pool, you're part of the gene pool, evolution is impacting population. Okay, and the last one was the non-random mating. If you decide to, I'm just going to marry this tribe, that's it. They will form their own specific, unique way they look, right? So if non-random is selected, it will just create that. Does that make sense? It's very simple.
Yes, it's well appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll think about it further and read a little bit more.
Sorry, I said.
So this is a question coming from a pastor. He wants to understand that if we all came from one common ancestor parents, Adam and Eve, what accounts for the different types of blood types and all of these things? Can it be explained under evolution? What accounts for the differences if indeed the scripture refers us to a common parent ancestor?
Yes, and there is definitely a common ancestor. As much as scientists might have discovered other common ancestors, so far that's what they've discovered. But Homo sapiens, as a population, have their own common ancestor. All right? And so we believe that common ancestor is Adam and Eve. Now, remember I mentioned the evolutionary process that lets population look different. Our DNA works not in vacuum but with other DNA. So if you are, so for example, I'm purely from the motherland. I'm a black woman or a person of color from Ghana, pure blood. My husband is white. That's what we say, but I don't like to use those terms. But anyway, I just want to explain something. My son that looks like, we call it half caste here. He doesn't look white, he doesn't look black. So he looks different from each of us. But does that mean he's changed into another species? No. Okay, so the mixing of genes brings diversity. We call it allelic recombinations. And do you know the person that revealed allele recombination and put a stop to Lamarckian evolution, which is still confusing us today? A monk. Christians must get into science, please. If you're a student here, please do. Gregor is the one that Mendel, if you've heard of Mendelian genetics, Gregor Mendel was the one who brought that understanding of how these independent assortment of genes, alleles, are bringing about the variation that we see by working on on peace in the monk garden. Yeah, all by himself.
Thank you. Now, another social issue that is directly related to biology. We know of what is happening in the West, which is creeping onto the African soil. Sorry, transgenderism. As a biologist, what is your stance on transgenderism as a biologist?
The $1 million question. Okay. So we have to understand, this morning I talked about the different dimensions that embody our existence. And gender is a social dimensional classification, all right? Given as the different genders that they keep. And I'm not a social scientist, so that is something that is happening. And you're asking, as a biologist, biology is the study of life. What kind of life? Social life? No. Spiritual life? No. Natural physical life. So for us biologists, when we are defining sex, not gender, because gender is a social dimensional understanding that have been crafted, the same way social Darwinism was a social understanding that was crafted, which has been actually rejected by the social scientists too. We, the natural scientists, biologically, your Y chromosome, all of us have X. It's the presence of Y or absence of Y is what determines you as a biological male or a biological female, male or female. So it doesn't matter how you look. If you have a Y chromosome, again, it's all the genes, right? If you have a Y chromosome, you're a male. If you do not have a Y chromosome, it doesn't matter if you have XXXXX, however, it gets recombined, all the anomalies of variation. If you do not have a Y chromosome, you're a female. And that's it. We are nerds, you know. We don't try to be complicated.
So as a biologist, what you are telling us is that with our molecular structure, we cannot transcend our chromosomes.
No, there is even your Play-Doh that is the foundational blueprint again, forming you, is what you have.
Thank you.
Mutations may bring variations, but who you are is who you are molecularly.
Thank you so much. So, getting to the end of the interview and discussion, I want you to tell us, if somebody wants to go into the sciences as a Christian, what would be the advice you would tell the person?
Learn to show yourself approved of God, rightly dividing the word of truth. We have to learn and study. We have to be willing to understand that we can ask God any questions. Again, you're asking if the person is a Christian, so that's how I'm bringing God in here. Ask God all the questions you want to ask. The person that you can be most vulnerable to is God. So if there is a doubt, who else can you ask than God? So if you're a believer and you want to enter into the natural sciences, please ask God every question. And that's what the Lord impressed on my heart. Do not question me, but ask me anything you want. And so when there is doubt, as I was in that field, the first person I go to is God. And I should say that God used my siblings a lot, because we are all in the sciences, to help me as well.
Thank you very much. As we end, my last statement is an admonition to our old believers, maybe an encouragement to our young believers, and an invitation to even skeptics out there that God, the Christian God, is not afraid of our questions. Come to him with your questions, and you would find more than just propositional answers. You will find a relationship that would give you more meaning than you could ever imagine in the person of Jesus Christ. Thank you so much for your time. Church,
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Indeed, a very stimulating discussion we've had. Please let the applause continue.